Hello, everybody, and thanks for tuning in to our Telequarium program today here at the Alaska SeaLife Center. My name's Haley, and I'm part of our education team here, and welcome to Storytime. Today, we're in front of our salmon tanks, so they're going to be hanging out with us, joining us for Storytime, so feel free to check out the salmon as well while I am reading. But today, we are going to read a book called One Small Place by the Sea. And this book is about tide pools, which are a really cool ecosystem that we can explore. So we're going to see what lives in a tide pool today. All right, so One Small Place by the Sea. Okay, a tide pool. One small place. This one's no bigger than a bathtub. It lies among the rocks and weeds at the edge of the sea. So here we have somebody exploring a tide pool, like you could do. At high tide, it's full of water. At low tide, it's no more than a salty puddle. Tides make it and unmake it twice a day. That's where it gets its name, a tide pool. Imagine standing at the rim of this tide pool as the tide is coming in. What do you see? Dozens of small animals and plants, jumbled together, over, under, next to, on top of one another. After a while, your eyes begin to sort them out. So we can see in this picture there's all sorts of things in a tide pool. And I actually brought some really cool things for show and tell today. So we have some examples of some things we might be able to find in a tide pool. So here we have some snail shells from all sorts of different snails. These could also be from snails, but we could also have some other animals living in them, like hermit crabs. So hermit crabs will sometimes find these shells, and they will try to call them home. A couple different snail shells. Here's another one of a slightly different shape, just to get some variety in there. We also have animals like sea stars. So this might look familiar to a lot of you. We have sea stars here at the Alaska SeaLife Center, and this guy has 5 arms. So you can go ahead and count them if you like. And then we also have some cool creatures called limpets. So this is a little limpet shell right here, and they're kind of like a snail, but this is what their shell would look like. So all sorts of animals we can find in the tide pool. I also have some really cool crab molts. So crabs, when they want to grow, they actually have to shed their skin. So they have a hard exoskeleton, we call it, which is basically like some armor. But if they want to grow bigger, they actually have to shed this, and then they can get a bigger set of armor, so a bigger shell. So this is a crab molt. So this crab is probably alive, doing great, but he left this behind. So you could potentially find this in a tide pool, or if you were really lucky, you might be able to find a crab molt that is this big. This is from a king crabs. They can get pretty large. All right. So we're going to get back to our story, and we're going to see what they found in their tide pool in the book. So let's see if they found any of the things that I just showed you. All right, where are we? Ooh, so here's an ochre sea star. It moves slowly along the bottom on hundreds of tiny tube feet. Those are like the little suckers on the bottom of the sea star. There's a bunch of blue mussels hanging on the rocks. They've spun threads of wiry glue to attach themselves. On the sandy bottom of the pool, there are 2 giant green anemones. The anemones look like plants. They're really animals. Some of you might have seen our sea anemones. Maybe if you've been fortunate enough to visit us in our touch tank, they kind of look like plants, but they're actually animals. But that creature in the weeds that looks like a fish, that is a fish. It's a sculpin, a fish that lives only in tide pools. So even fish can live in tide pools. Now you're looking more closely, you begin to see smaller and smaller things. Hermit crabs, turban snails, periwinkles, limpets, chitons, and a rock covered with barnacles. You lift a tangle of seaweed. Surprise! Worms, bugs, and snails, no bigger than a baby's fingernail. So all sorts of things in our tide pool. We have really big things like our sea star. Maybe we have some tiny snails, maybe some tiny little worms as well. Now the sea star goes hunting. It climbs up the rocks, moves along the mussel colony, picks a target. The mussel tries to close, but the sea star pushes itself inside the mussel's shell. Its powerful stomach juices turn the mussel into mush. Ew. The sea star sucks up the mush. So that's actually how sea stars eat. They digest everything outside of their body, and then they eat it afterwards. Imagine if you digested a plate of spaghetti and then ate it afterwards. That would be pretty weird. A turban snail glides by. It picks up the scent of the sea star. Alarmed, it moves away. But in its haste, it brushes against the tentacles of one of the anemones. Oh no. Those tentacles are deadly. In a few seconds, the snail is food for the anemone. It eats the soft parts and spits out the hard shell. Here's the anemone, the little snail. Poor guy. A hermit crab sees the empty shell. It looks it over. It's not about food, it's about space. The hermit crab has outgrown the shell that was its home. It tries on the empty shell for size. Good fit. It will move away, carrying the new home on its back. So the hermit crab found a whole new place to live. After about 6 hours, the tide turns once again. The waves no longer reach the tide pool. The water level in the tide pool begins to drop. The mussels close up, the sea star rests, the hermit crab retreats into its new shell. Periwinkles, limpets, and chitons move lower on the rocks to catch some ocean spray. So here, everyone's starting to dry out, but they're gonna go back into the water as it goes away. The sculpin comes back to the tide pool and swims towards the bottom. The anemones shrink. Plants stop making their own food. It's downtime at the tide pool until the tide comes again. Nothing in nature lasts forever. A sea star might eat all the mussels here. Then there would be an empty space in the tide pool. New animals and plants would drift into that empty space. The tide pool would look different and be different. Or a gull might come by and gobble up the sea star. Without the hungry sea star, the mussel bed might overgrow. The tide pool would get too crowded. Some things would get squeezed out. Some things might die. The tide pool would still be a tide pool, but it would change. So tide pools can be really different. They can come in all shapes and sizes. There are tide pools all over the world. No two are exactly the same size. No two hold exactly the same animals and plants. But some things are always the same. Every tide pool in the world depends on tides, and every tide pool is one small place that is home for many things. Oh yeah, okay, so we're gonna show you those shells again a little bit closer so you can get a better look at them. So here we have some shells. So we have this one right here. So here, if you're having a little trouble seeing, there you go. So there's this shell right here for you. Pretty cool. And then we have a different kind of shell. So this one's a little bit different shaped. Hermit crabs find all sorts of different shells appealing, so maybe they'd prefer one over the other, or they're from different types of snails. And then here's that sea star I was talking about. Pretty cool. And last but not least, we got our limpet shell for you. Oh yeah, and here's the other side too. All right, great. Okay, everyone, so thank you so much for joining us for Storytime. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you have any comments or questions, you can leave them below in this video, but also we're going to be exploring our touch tanks at 2 p.m. today. So if you want to see any of the animals that we talked about in our touch tanks, so living animals, really cool, you can tune in at 2 p.m. and we're going to be talking about all of those animals. Also, if you like what we're doing, go ahead and give this video a big thumbs up. We'd really appreciate it. And you can also subscribe to our channel for more. All right, thank you so much for joining us. Bye, everybody.